there were 2 times in the first 6 months of me open micing where I bombed so bad, so badly. 2 different times I did this. I just went home, took off my shoes, got into bed fully dressed, and cried myself to sleep. And I'm a 35-year-old man covered in tattoos, 220, you know.
Yeah,
like
I'm it just like hurts your soul.
It hurts your soul, yeah.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. The great thing about entrepreneurs is that on almost any topic, you could name a business owner across the entire scale. Let's start with money. Jeff Bezos is a pretty rich dude. And on the other end, a homeless person on a street corner is doing the best they can with the cards they were dealt. When it comes to personality, Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are total introverts, while Joe Rogan and Dwayne Johnson could probably talk to a fish for 8 hours. There are big personalities and small ones, overflowing bank accounts and a sock full of change hidden under the couch. Everyone can be an entrepreneur. But there are some fields that you simply know the path to success is a tiny trail up the side of a steep mountain. Our guest today decided to take one of those. His rugged entrepreneurial trail of choice was comedy, found accidentally while he was chasing another hard-fought dream, a career in music. About 10 years ago, Matt Alano Martin was performing as a singer-songwriter under the name Sam Lowry. His songs were heavy and sad, so he started throwing out whimsical banter between each song to lighten the mood. At some point, he realized people liked the banter more than they liked the music, so he started to refine his jokes and perform at open mic nights. Everything started snowballing from there. Matt now performs more than 150 shows a year, co-founded the Limestone Comedy Festival here in Bloomington, Indiana, and just opened for Tig Notaro. In our conversation, he breaks down how he does it, from building a joke to traveling all the time to the business of comedy. We're glad you joined us. Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich, owner of Shine Insurance, and your host for the Scratch Entrepreneur podcast. I am here today with Matt Alano Martin. He is a comedian and the founder of the Limestone Comedy Festival. Seen him on stage. Also really appreciate his work around the Limestone Comedy Festival. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I don't want to start off being contradictory. I'm the co-founder of the Limestone Comedy Festival.
Right. Okay, cool.
I always want to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, and Jared Thompson,
Jared
right?
Thompson is the other co-founder.
Absolutely. And both of you did an amazing job on that.
you.
And Jared Thompson owns
The Comedy Addict.
The Comedy Addict. Just blanked on that.
That's okay. It's early. We are doing this a little early.
Let's start in the podcast world. Do you listen to podcasts?
I do. I had kind of gotten away from it for a while, but I've started to gravitate back towards it. I'm a big music person, and like everybody, when podcasts first sort of became mainstream into our consciousness, I thought they were amazing and everything. But I think I burned myself out a little bit.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm just now kind of slowly getting back into it. So
yeah, I listen to podcasts a lot at lunchtime, and I feel like I scroll through all my, like I've gotten to the point where there's so many that it's like I just don't even know what to listen to anymore. So I have to just like clean it out and get back to the ones I love.
Yeah, I've tried to keep mine down to a manageable. I'm also kind of a comic book guy. And so in the comic book world, you have these things called pulls where the comic book shop will pull issues for you, right? They hold them for you.
Oh, cool.
And my pull list is the same thing. I had to keep it sort of minimal, so I'm not spending a ton of money.
Yeah.
But there's also only so much time in the day to read comic books and listen to podcasts.
Right. So you got to just like, and I think that's a natural probably process with lots of things where you get into it and then it's like, you're totally into it, and then it's like, man, I got to back this thing off because I'm spending all this time. And
yeah. You got to like start prioritizing your hobby, I guess, or your leisure activity, if you will.
Yeah. So what's one podcast you're into right now?
I have really, really been enjoying Beautiful Anonymous by Chris Gethard.
Yeah.
I don't mean for this to sound braggy, but we're just in the same sort of business. But I've been friends with Chris for a couple of years. I've had the opportunity to work with him, and we've become friends.
Yeah.
And I somehow slept on this podcast. I knew he was doing it, but I just, again, not being a huge podcast guy, I'd never really checked it out. And then I finally got it, and it's amazing. It's
He's
beautiful.
so good.
He's great, and he does a sort of empathy-based entertainment that I think we're sorely lacking these days.
Yes, if you haven't heard it before, the premise of the podcast is that he has one person call in, and then he talks to them for 50 minutes, whether they want to talk for 50 minutes or not, which they always do because they've called in, obviously. And he's a comedian, and he's, but his approach to it is very empathy-based. I like how you say that. It's like he just talks with these, these callers.
There's no names, and people aren't really allowed to give where they're, like, if they're telling a childhood story, they can they can say they grew up on the East Coast, but that's about as detailed as they can get. Yeah. There's been episodes about, a woman from England talking about her miscarriage and how hard that was to get over, and then to finally having a child, and then what that's been like, and then to, very hilarious, ridiculous stories of people's like misspent youth. So you never know what you're going to get with it, but it is unique, I think, as far as a long form. It's not just a long form conversation with someone on one topic or some famous person about their life. It is just average people.
Yeah.
And Chris is, I think, a master interviewer.
He is amazing. Yeah. It's just, it feels very comfortable. And those are the podcasts I like, or where you feel like you're sitting in a room with someone,
Right.
The podcast Tape, which with Moj, I can't remember his last name right now, but he interviews podcasters, big media people, and he has the same approach where it just feels very comfortable.
That's good. It's like he's on the media for podcasts, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know if you know that radio show.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's the snake has started to eat its own tail, people, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, and it is, because it's funny, because he has been a part of This American Life and all those other things. And now he's starting to interview people who he's worked with, and it just does feel a little circular. Yeah. But he just interviewed Ira Glass, and it was amazing. Let's talk a little bit about you. Obviously, you grew up to be a musician, a comedian, be in that world, and we're going to talk a lot about that. As a kid, do you remember watching a comedy special or something that just stuck out that you just laughed super hard at and maybe started the ball rolling in this direction?
I've always been obsessed with comedy. I grew up in rural Clark County, Indiana, so about 45 minutes to an hour north of Louisville, Kentucky. And as you said, I did wind up following music first because there was more of a path for that. You have band classes in school. There's a guitar store next to the laundromat that we went to. There was a lot of like open doors to follow that passion. But for comedy, it just seemed sort of like out of touch. But I distinctly remember being a kid and sneaking out of my room and watching Saturday Night Live over the back of the couch while my parents had fallen asleep on the couch.
Yeah.
And there was definitely one summer where I was obsessed with imitating Gilda Radner's Rosanna Dana character. So I would go around doing all the catchphrases. So it was probably the first example of my obsession with comedy and the first window into my gender fluidity. So, you know.
You're like, cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Boys can pretend to be girls. It's fine. Yeah.
Cool. So that was your connection from being a kid. And
also, Jeremy, if I'm going to throw out jokes like this, you're going to have to laugh at some of them, okay? If I'm dropping something like that, which is like it's sort of a true thing, but also in a joke format, you're going to have to give me a little something. Right? You're like, cool. All right. So
cool. Let's just, move on. Well, the reference. So I like, my big issue is I don't remember half the shit from being a kid and stuff like that. And so like the reference to Rosanna, I don't know it.
Okay. Well, it was a female character. I'll just put it that way. So yeah. And I mean, my dad actually had issues with me imitating that instead of imitating like John Belushi's Samurai or something.
Like, why are you?
Yeah, I mean, not like huge issues, but enough of a concern.
Yeah.
But it was Gilda Radner was hands down the funniest person on the original cast of Saturday Night Live. So why wouldn't you imitate that?
Right.
I
know. I just I don't have the connection with the
Sure,
the
I'm older
there.
than you are, so okay. Pretend that I was running around pretending to be Jan Hooks. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, great.
So you grow up and you're like, you start playing music. You start being on the stage. You start this relationship with the stage. Obviously, you've been on the stage as a musician. You've been behind the stage for other musicians. You're now on the stage all the time as a comedian. What does the stage mean to you?
I'm 45 now, and I've had some time to sort of reflect on what makes me tick. I think ultimately all of my music and everything else that I've ever done has been sort of an attempt to communicate. It's essentially what it's about. It's about communicating my ideas and my thoughts, and also connecting.
Yeah.
I'm not going to deny there's a sort of validation issue there too, but also just this idea of like sharing, like my view of the world or my creativity. So I think the stage has always been sort of that element of it. And it's no different than like when I was in college, I used to make a zine, and that's a non-stage version of it. It's kind of like, hey, I thought these weird thoughts. I want to put them out into the world, kind of thing.
I mean, I think we all have some level of that. And the cool thing about what you do is you really get to turn it into who you are as an adult. Like you get to throw out your ideas, whether that was musically earlier. And now I think comedy is so much better at relating your internal ideas and to an audience, and then get a specific reaction from the audience to kind of see how that's going.
Yeah, it's the most immediate thing. I'd played music for 20 plus years before I ever did comedy, and comedy was terrifying. I'd been on stage for 20 years, but the first time I did comedy, it was like it's exhilarating, but also terrifying, which had not happened to me in a really long time on stage. But you're right. The great thing about comedy is it is the most unfiltered version of this. Like you can write a song and, you have sort of like poetic lyrics, or even if you have just very plain spoken lyrics, if you kind of have more of like a Springsteen approach or something like that, which is a type of poetry in and of itself, but you have more straightforward, stuff. Songs can still be like misinterpreted, or people just don't listen to the lyrics, as much as they listen to the tune. But yeah, with comedy, it's like literally just words and thoughts. And because there is that immediacy too, like second by second, if you're connecting, if you're not connecting, how people are reacting to this. With a song, people generally wait their 3.5 minutes and then they clap politely at the end,
right.
you don't really know.
Well, it's like you talking about Saturday Night Live at the beginning of this conversation. Like I couldn't hide the fact that I didn't get your reference.
Yeah. That's
and so like as a comedian,
I thought you were just in your own head as a podcaster. You're like, next question.
Next question. No, I just couldn't connect. And I think as a musician, you can think people are connecting and they clap at the end of the song because that's kind of like what you do.
Yeah.
And you don't get the kind of immediate feedback as you do as a comedian, because it's obvious whether people think what you've said is funny or not funny, or pushes them beyond their comfort zone or doesn't. What are a few types of reactions that you get from a crowd? Like there's got to be a span of types of reactions.
Yeah. Well, it just depends. It depends on the material and it depends on the crowd. I don't see myself as a particularly like edgy or button pushing kind of comic, but I will tell you this. I've been talking recently on stage about being in therapy and what that's been done for me. Yeah. And we are still at a point in this country where people are so uncomfortable talking about mental health that even if it's just like, and it's pretty light, I'm not getting too heavy into it, but I'm just talking about my therapist or whatever. And it's like, which also is so odd to me because like comedians have been talking about that very topic for 20 plus years. Richard Lewis would talk about his therapist for an hour,
Yeah.
And that was like a comedian from New York because I feel like I'm just going to have to explain a lot of it. It's one of those things like when you live inside the world, this seems like secondhand. But if you also like, I hang out with my friends who are sports fans and they're referencing players who played 20 years ago, and I'm dumb for not knowing that.
Right.
So I'm not trying to judge. So, but there's people get a little tight. I've discovered that if you can do like 2 jokes about therapy, but when you go into that third one, people start to be like, "Oh God, is this what this is all going to be about?"
Right. Yeah.
And again, they're all jokes. They all have punchlines. They have releases to the tension that you've built. So that's something I've definitely noticed recently. I used to have a joke. There's a joke on my first album that is about the setup is talking about a 9/11 bumper sticker.
Yeah.
And it would always 100% get so tight and uncomfortable in the room, which it was supposed to by design.
Right.
Because then the punchline, the release of it is, I'm making fun of redneck culture. I'm not making fun of 9/11. Obviously, I'm not making fun of the victims of 9/11 or that trap.
But it looks like you are as you're setting it up.
It's the sort of thing that the minute that you would start to talk about that topic, people would be like, oh,
And you can feel that in the room.
You can feel it, which you can use to your effect, as a comedian.
Yeah.
Because the more tension that you build, as long as you can successfully release that tension with the punchline, the bigger the laugh is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was definitely an earlier moment in my comedy career where I realized the power of that sort of dynamic of knowing. And I have a story that I'm working on now that is a pretty heavy story from my childhood. And it's the same sort of thing. It gets real serious.
Yeah.
But then the release is real big.
So you start with a story, and that is comedy, right? Comedy is storytelling.
Well, not all of it. Some of it's just clever wordplay and observational stuff. That's the great thing about it is you can also blend and mix all that stuff together. You can have basically a pun the opening joke in my therapy section now, the first part of it is, kind of like just set up tension, release. And then there's in comedy of these things called tags, which is like punchlines after the punchline, right? So you have a big punchline and just kind of keep that idea going a couple more times. And one of the tags is a straight up pun, a punny pun. So you can blend all that stuff together. I can be serious and kind of play with your emotions. I can have the release. It's a kind of a story about a time in my life, but then I can also flip it over into doing this ridiculous wordplay that is just silly,
So that just is like, it takes it from the story to the humor of it.
Right.
But there is like a story curve that you're walking through in the process of talking through your set.
Yeah, but I'm also more of a autobiographical type of comedian where I'm mostly talking about my life and my experiences. But there is some observational stuff in there too,
Yeah. You opened for Tig Notaro recently and that was a great set.
Thank you.
What you were just talking about though made me think of part of what Tig was doing on stage with the driving off the cliff joke.
Oh yeah.
So the basic premise, is it okay to say premises of people's sets?
I think you can, I think it's okay. We're talking about it. I don't think,
Okay, I don't want to give away somebody's set though.
Yeah, she's kind of telling the story about you do it.
Okay, well, yeah. She's talking. Her and a good friend of hers are always happy, always fun, always enjoying themselves around all their friends. And their friends joke that even if they drove off a cliff, they'd be laughing on the way over the cliff, right?
Yeah.
And so she goes on with that and continues probably 5 minutes of the set. It was long, it was hilarious, it was uncomfortable.
You're right.
So she was playing off of that like discomfort of like imagining yourself dying.
Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious, and someone I was there with was like, it crossed the line for me. I didn't like it at all. And I was like, well, that's probably perfect. Like, what do you think about that line?
That's interesting. You never know what's going to set someone off. Obviously there's a lot of comedians that'll complain about PC culture. I'm all for PC culture. PC culture got women the right to vote. It got children out of factories. PC culture gets a bad rap. You know? I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm just trying to be honest when I'm on stage, but you never know what's going to set somebody off, and clearly like this very ridiculous sort of like, well, what if I was driving off a cliff? She's not talking about she's just talking about her own death, essentially.
Right.
And, who knows why that triggered your friend. I don't want to say the word triggered. That's such a loaded word. But, but they found that to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes people need to hear stuff. Like I talk about being in an interracial marriage on stage. And I once had a white woman in Little Rock, Arkansas, kind of tell me how bad I was at comedy and how much she didn't like my set. And then immediately, had, scores of African-American attendees come out and tell me how much they loved it, right? Which sounds braggy as a white guy to say. But it really was. Like this redneck lady did not like the fact that I'm talking about racial equality and it's just like my normal life and whatever. And then, other people in the audience are totally behind that.
Yeah. That's the power of comedy in some ways is you get to talk about this stuff. You get to talk about all sorts of stuff that we're not supposed to talk about.
Right, yeah.
And you get to make people a little bit uncomfortable because we all know that you're going to break that discomfort, one, with some kind of punchline or some kind of end. But also it's bringing it to surface. There's lots to be said about comedians like being one of the main places where we can talk about things that are hard to talk about.
I agree, yeah. Because we also have the safety and the out of like, well, it's just comedy. We're just joking around or whatever. So I think it allows us a little bit more freedom to dip our toes in those difficult waters than, say, a professional media person might have a trickier time talking about these things, at least in a more irreverent way or, whether you were on board or not with the last couple of Dave Chappelle specials, he was able to talk about some issues in a way. I was trying to think of a news person, but everyone I'm thinking of is a disgrace. I was going to say Charlie Rose. No, that's not a good example. Tom Brokaw. I think Tom Brokaw is still pretty safe, right?
I don't think
so. Tom could really talk about these issues in such a way. I have a couple of Trump jokes that I would do in very conservative rednecky places, and you could feel them not liking it. But at the end, the jokes are ridiculous, and it's just kind of like we can all kind of laugh that he's sort of a ridiculous human being. I'm not, I'm not bashing his policies. I'm not bashing like you for voting for him. I'm just saying like he's a ridiculous human being, or acknowledging just sort of how divisive the country is right now. But I think you can do that, and in a weird way, it is like sort of planting seeds.
All right, cool. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dig into the act of comedy, kind of how you create a set a little bit, and dig into that piece a little bit.
Cool.
Scratch Entrepreneur is brought to you by Shine Insurance. At Shine, our goal is simple: to change the way you feel about insurance. Start that evolution today at shineinsurance.com.
All right, we're back with Matt Alano Martin, the co-founder of Limestone Comedy Festival and a comedian who travels all over the country. So you said, I think on something I listened to the other day, you've done like 150 shows in 2017 or something like that.
Yeah, that's about my average every year is about 150, yeah.
So you travel all over the country and have all these experiences on tour. And so before we talk about the fortune and fame that you've experienced, I want to know what the shadiest hotel room you've ever stayed in is.
Oh, man. Man, this is a good question. It's hard for me to recall this because I've blocked it out. No, I've definitely stayed in some really bad ones, although I've definitely stayed in ones where I've slept in all of my clothes because I didn't want any of my skin, and like a sock hat because I didn't want any part of me to touch the bed. You have to also remember that I used to tour with bands too, so there was also some experiences there where not even hotel rooms, but like you would just stay at some like local band house that would let all the bands, like this was the house that every band that came through town got to stay at. Yeah. And you're sleeping on couches and floors and stuff, and some of those were super disgusting. And there were definitely a couple occasions then with the band scenario where I would just go sleep in the van. Yeah. Because it was cleaner, it was quieter. Yeah. Man, I don't know. I feel like you want me to give you a name of a specific hotel.
No, not at all. I just thought I was trying to think of
the Waldorf Astoria in New York, a pigsty. I cannot believe.
Every time I stay in the lofts at the top of the place, it's just the worst.
Exactly. Like
we stayed in a hotel in Montreal, Mackenzie and I, a couple months ago. That's where John Lennon did the bed in or the sleep in thing, and they still haven't updated that room. Like there's still like paint on the window and all that stuff.
Did you stay in that room?
No, you can though. You can stay in that room, and it's like it hasn't been renovated since they did that.
Well, you're saying that as if it's like a bad thing. You're like, no, I can't believe really they haven't updated this hotel.
No, absolutely. I wanted to go up there, and I think I don't know, you have to pay money to go up there or something like that. Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little touristy thing.
Yeah, cool.
That's exactly what they were fighting for, John and Yoko, when they're doing the bed in. They're like, please
keep this. And
40 years later, please keep this. Please turn this into a marketing opportunity.
And that's exactly what they did. So I see comedy, and you said this earlier in our conversation, that maybe this isn't always the case, but I really see comedy as a storytelling process. And I wonder, A, if you see it that way or not, and B, if you can kind of pull back the curtains a little bit on how you put together a set. Like where does the thought process start? Just like a quick overview of how a comedian puts things together.
Well, I mean, I think this also speaks volume to the type of comedy that you're attracted to, and because you did go to see Tig Notaro, and I'm going to hazard a guess, you're probably like a Mike Birbiglia guy. Yeah. So storytelling is definitely
I got both one of those divisions.
Okay, I went as modern as I could.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can tell this by listening, but Jeremy is a 12-year-old tween. He's a millennial.
Right, I'm like, who? What?
He's been on his Snapchat this entire time.
Yeah, just
super unprofessional. No, there's definitely storytelling as one sort of arm of it, but I don't think it's necessarily true that all. Because I mean, a good example is like Emo Phillips. Emo Phillips, you don't know anything about Emo's real life, and it's just brilliant joke after brilliant joke after brilliant joke. And there's also, Seinfeld's a good example of this too. Seinfeld, you never really learned anything about Seinfeld's life from his act. So a lot of comedians are storytellers or use that to certain extents in their set, but it's not necessarily true that all of comedy falls under that. Okay. But I definitely am in that camp, and the way that I will put together a set, it really depends on the length of the set. If I'm headlining, so I'm doing 45 to an hour, there's sort of a narrative arc. I've become less and less tied to the narrative arc, but starting off, it was very important for me it has a beginning, a middle, and an end that sort of makes logical sense to me. A, because that makes it more easy to do from memory. If it goes from, my first album is like most people's comedy first albums where it's like the origin story. This is where I grew up. This is like what high school was like. This is what college was like. This is how I am now. It's very much like that sort of thing. Now, I mean, it's fun to kind of play with the form of it and just decide how I want to do it. So as a comedian right now, the way I'll build a set is I look at, if I'm doing a headlining set, like let's say 45 to an hour, like I'm in a position right now where I just released a new album.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to not do any material off of that. Right. I'm trying to do new material.
Not do any material off of the album you just released?
Yes, because for a couple of different reasons. But part of the reason that you record an album in comedy, I spent 4 years working that hour of material, writing it, honing it, getting it better, throwing stuff out, adding new stuff, right? So I've spent a lot of time talking about that material. So one, I'm just kind of ready to move on.
Done talking, yeah.
Yeah, and then also, there's just sort of a practical element of it, like at the end of the show when you're trying to sell the album, it's not like music where you like, all of our greatest hits are on this thing. It has to be like, I have an album, it's a whole other hour of material you did not hear tonight.
You didn't hear these jokes already.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So there's sort of a practical element to it there. Where I am right now, I recorded that album in February. We're recording this podcast right now in November. The album came out in October. From February to October, when the album came out, I've written about 20 minutes of material that I like, that I think is pretty good and worth keeping and working on.
Yeah.
So that 20 minutes is definitely in, right? And then I'm looking at, I probably will work 5 to 10 new ideas, right?
Yeah.
So now we're up to half an hour.
Right.
So then I'm going to take probably like 10 minutes from the new album, and maybe 10 minutes or so from the first album, which has actually been fun because I've not touched that material in several years.
You're coming back to old.
So I get to go back to old things, like, which is interesting. Like now, 5 years later, how do I feel about that material? And I've been actually sort of adapting and changing some of it. So like the base joke is the same, but I have different tags. I take it into a different, I just kind of like reinterpret it, the old material, which has been fun. That's been like a way to kind of keep it fresh.
Yeah.
So that's how I'll put together like a long set. And then you kind of think about what's the closer, what's kind of like the biggest piece that I want to end on, what's as far as like the opening, like what kind of tone do I want to set when I come out?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of like the important stuff. And then you kind of wedge the brand new stuff in between things that have worked most of the time in front of most of the people.
Yeah.
So that in case it doesn't go well, because it's all about momentum. If you have one joke that doesn't hit, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you have 3 or 4 in a row that doesn't hit, you start to lose the confidence of the audience.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so your jokes go through, and it's almost like any other product or creative endeavor that you put together. Like you can see the things that are moving up the list of reactions they get from an audience.
Yeah.
And so you hone that and make that work better. How do you know when something needs to just leave the whole thing? You thought about it, you liked it, you put it in there, it bombed once, maybe it bombed twice. Like how do you get rid of it, or how do you know to get rid of it?
Well, I think there's a lot of different theories on this. Joan Rivers very famously said that she'll give every joke 3 chances. Like, so she'll do a joke as written 3 times, like in front of 3 completely different audiences, right?
Yeah.
Different cities.
Yeah.
Before she ever makes any sort of judgment on it at all. I think that's a good base rule. Is you got to give it, because you never know. You might debut a joke on a cold night. They're just not feeling it or whatever, and also you can get. It's interesting how just a slight word change or the way you change the delivery can really change a joke from not working to completely working.
Huh.
I had a joke that was basically 3 sections. It was a longer, sort of more structural joke. And from the jump, I could always get the first third of it to work. It was 3 sections. First third, I could always make that work pretty much from the minute that I thought of it.
Yeah.
But the minute it shifted to that second section, I would lose people. Huh. And it took probably 3 or 4 months of actively re-tinkering, working. Like, again, a lot of it was just delivery, like the way that I decided to sell that transition and kind of talk about it, and some wording choices. Then I could get the first 2 sections to work.
Yeah.
And then that third section wouldn't work because it kind of shifts again as far as the topic. They're all 3 tied together topic wise, but when it shifted again, it just, people got off board, and that took like another 3 or 4 months. So I basically spent 6 months, 8 months on this one joke to get it to work from start to finish.
But you didn't give up on it.
I didn't give up on it because I knew sometimes there's ones internally, that this idea is right. And I don't mean like I mean just as a comedic way. It's this should work.
Yeah.
This should work. I'm not just being stubborn. I mean, I've definitely done jokes that I've liked, and every comedian has this, where there's jokes that you really love that the audience is just not on board with.
Yeah.
It's too weird or it's too dark.
Yeah.
But this one I knew, I was like, this is all logical. It all makes sense. I just have to figure out how to convey it.
Yeah.
To where I get everybody to take this journey with me,
And so it got to the point where all 3 sections were working.
Yeah. So, and I've retired that joke for a while now. It's on the second album. When I recorded the first album, I could get the first 2 sections to work, but I could never get the third. So I didn't put it on the first record.
Yeah.
I didn't do it that weekend when we recorded. And so it really was the first original piece that the second record had was but then 3 or 4 months later after I had recorded the first record, I finally got that one to work. But I knew it wasn't there yet, so I couldn't include it.
You just knew that was going to make it. It was about wording. It was about delivery.
Right.
It was about just your internal processes, but the joke worked.
Yes. All the comedic ideas that go from A to B to C in this joke are sound, good turns, they're good examples. They're not too extreme. They're not too out there. They're not too weird. It really just came down to a matter of, particularly the third section, a lot of it was how I sold it,
Like just the tone of voice almost.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be as simple as that. I've toyed around with certain lines in a joke. Do I whisper them? Do I yell them? Do I there really is a thing about what works better for emotional context of this moment in this joke. Am I talking about my reaction to something? Am I reacting exasperated? Am I shaking my head exasperated? Am I mad? Do I yell it? Am I just hurt? You know? So it's little moments like that can fix a joke, basically.
Yeah, I mean, you think about comedians hitting the microphone. Sometimes it's just the sound with the microphone, or the way you
act
with
out,
and stuff like that, and the body language.
Well, it's like anything else. I have mentally deconstructed this. To figure out how to do it. To me, it's just like being a musician that can look at, oh, this is what a scale is, and these are all the scales you have, and these are all the chords you have at your disposal.
Yeah.
If you're a musician and you're writing a song on the guitar and you're looking for what's that third chord I want.
Yeah.
And you can't quite, and it's whether or not it sounds right to your ear. The thing with comedy is you have to just do that in front of people.
Yeah.
They're going, that's the wrong chord.
Your audience is telling you it's the wrong chord.
Yeah, you should have gone to a minor there. You shouldn't have gone to a major.
Yeah, which is what's so fascinating about it. And I feel like you have to have such a strong personal self to be able to, 1, stand up there and do it, period. Mm-hmm. But then 2, to be able to listen to the audience, take the feedback, which means that you did something wrong. Mm-hmm. So it's accepting your own faults, and then taking the effort to turn it around, try it again, do it again. So I feel like comedians just have a super thick skin, I guess.
Yeah, you have to. You have to. You don't start off that way. You have to build it up.
Okay, so we're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the business of comedy.
Yep.
Not only Limestone Comedy Festival, but also just how you kind of handle the business of comedy, and then we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good.
Cool.
Scratch Entrepreneur is brought to you by Shine Insurance. Insurance, I know, ugh, but hear me out. If you own a business, you know that the path to success is through the people around you. One of those people should be your insurance agent. Think of your agent right now. Would you list that person as a top 10 member of your team? If not, maybe they shouldn't be a member at all. My favorite part of owning Shine is the vital advisory role we play in our clients' businesses. Our business clients do list us in their top 10 most important members of their teams. So I'd like to give Scratch Entrepreneur listeners one of the most important assets our business has to offer: our time. If you have a burning insurance question, simply wonder if the experience you're having is normal, or want some inside information into how the industry works, we'd like to offer a 15-minute insurance coaching session. No gimmicks or tricks. You don't even have to get a quote from us. We'll simply help the best we can. All you have to do is reach out using my personal email address, jeremy@shineinsurance.com. I'll share a link to our calendar, and that's it. 15 minutes, whatever questions you have. It's just one more way Shine Insurance can reach our goal of changing the way you feel about insurance.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the business of being a comedian. Obviously, we don't think about comedy as a business on the surface. We go see a comedian. It's like creativity, entertainment, all those kind of things. But obviously, there's a business behind it. What are some of the lessons you've learned about how to make money as a comedian?
Well, I'm still figuring that out. But it's a lot of building your name and your reputation. And so there's a lot of paying dues. There's definitely a long period of comedy where you're not paid. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest part of it is you just have to build your act or your product to a point that other people see value in it, right? Mm-hmm. So what you do on stage gets to a point that bookers and audience members are like, this is a good thing. This is worth money.
Yeah.
So, and it takes several years to get it to that point, which you can think in like sort of a business mode is sort of like the R&D section.
Yeah.
Right. You're not making any money on this. You're spending money on this. You're going out every night,
building
open mics,
you're
trying to
building.
figure this out and everything. It's like any sort of other independent contractor, there's like the whole, you are on the hook for everything, and so but then also obviously there's some tax benefits to that as well, where you can claim just about every aspect of your existence. Everything in your existence can be claimed on your taxes, which is very nice. I think a big lesson I've learned recently is sort of not devaluing my work, because comedy is very popular right now, and so everyone wants to have it, and sometimes there's like a random bar that wants to have a comedy night and they want to pay you $30 or whatever to do an hour. And you're like, well, I'm not doing that. And they're like, well, so-and-so, they're worth $30 an hour,
Right,
like they're an amateur comedian, so it is that sort of like, and that's a hard thing for us, I think, as comedians and hustlers, and same thing with musicians. You're just so used to for so long not getting paid for your work that when you do start getting paid for your work, and then after a few years of that, you need to then start thinking about, oh, well, I'm at this sort of level, I have these credits and I've done all this and I'm this good on stage. Like I should turn down these offers that are sort of, I don't want to say beneath me because that sounds very cocky.
No,
but
I know exactly what you mean.
What your time is actually worth.
Aren't your ideal experience for what your time's worth.
Right, yeah.
And I think that happens in really almost I'm in insurance, which is the least funny thing in the history of all things, right? And we have the same conversation. It's like, okay, well, these are the things that aren't working. This is the base of folks that isn't connecting in a way that makes us money and makes us happy and makes us feel like we're really truly affecting people's lives and helping people. So how can we attract more towards the stuff that actually values who we are? And I think it's just harder in the creative world because there's more of a mentality that you're supposed to be willing to do it for $30 and,
right, or for free. Yeah. And you have to kind of break through that. And that's not to say that I don't still go do shows for free. I mean, like when I'm on an open mic, I'm not getting paid. Because I'm not getting paid, I'm also there working on brand new stuff. So results may vary,
Right.
I mean, I have a certain level of history and time in this that even my new jokes are at least pretty much there,
formed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I have a good sense from the writing table now of what I'm doing, and it's not to say that I have to be paid, huge amounts of money to do comedy. If it sounds like it's a fun thing or, like there's definitely a lot of variables in there too, but it really is when someone is clearly just trying to take advantage of you. And then you're gonna have to say, no, thank you.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
So, and then you kind of switch. I mean, you're still on the comedian side. That's a bunch of what you do, most of what you do, but you switch to the other side a little bit with the Limestone Comedy Festival, where now you're the booker. You guys are bringing people in, and you've brought in a ton of people from Tig Notaro to Peyton Oswald and Michelle Wolf and Michael Che, and the list goes on of comedians that have come to the Limestone Comedy Festival over the last 5 years. Did the business side of it change for you when you started being on that side of the conversation?
Maybe. I mean, I'm definitely not at the same level of the people that you named, which are the headliners that we bring in. I'm definitely not a Michelle Wolf level or anything as a comedian. So the things of being on the flip side of the person writing the check, that hasn't greatly affected my comedy side of it. We did Limestone because I recognized that the Comedy Attic was at a certain level, like definitely regionally, but also nationally, as far as like the reputation of being this very special thing in comedy. And I had come from this world of like, after I played in bands, I had tour managed bands for 7 years. So I had a lot of production experience. And so I just, wanted to marry those two things together. And I'd done a few comedy festivals. At the time, comedy festivals were not super common. Now there's a lot of them, but I'd done a few of them, and there are things that they did right and the things that they did wrong. And I thought we could build a better mousetrap, essentially, with Limestone. And so being on the flip side of it, it is a little bit of a weird thing of having one foot in that world and then also one foot as a performer. I've actually only performed real sets on Limestone stage like twice in 6 years. I'll host like the Blooming 10 show, which is a local showcase of our local talent. But for the most part, I haven't done just sets in the festival because I'm busy running
You're
stuff.
running the festival.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very hard to switch to performer mind,
Yeah.
for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, and then go right back to the guy with the clipboard. you know?
Right. Yeah. It's like Pete Rose being the manager and the player on the team.
Yeah.
Which is my sports analogy.
Yeah, I got that one. I got that one. Yeah. Yeah. And you're leaving out the third part where he's also betting on the team.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, he had his
true.
hands full, man.
How did he handle all that? Now that, 3 different parts, he was doing it all well until he got caught.
Yeah.
So comedians do like to come to Bloomington, and that's the Comedy Addict's a huge reason for that. But it seems like the audience in Bloomington is special in some way for comedians. Is that true? Is that BS? Or can you describe what the
Are you saying all those comedians have lied to you from the stage?
Well, no, I just wonder because it does seem like, I guess what I've heard is that comedians like Bloomington because they feel like they can try out new stuff here in a way that maybe they can't in other places.
Yeah, and that speaks basically solely to the vision of Jared and Dana Thompson with the Comedy Addict, where they created a high-end sort of room for the art of comedy.
Yeah.
And I tell people this all the time. Like a club can train its audience. It can train its audience this is what comedy is. This is what to expect. And you may not like every single person in there, but you're not coming in there expecting to see a ventriloquist act, like a racist ventriloquist or whatever, they just kind of will shape the audience's mind. Like this is what comedy is.
Yeah.
I think because they built that culture there, it's definitely true. People are willing to let comedians be more adventurous, more experimental, or if a comedian just comes in and wants to do their hour, they want to do, it's clearly like this is A to Z. This whole thing is mapped out. It's very tight.
Yeah.
They'll take that too. Like they're very open to whatever the person on stage wants to perform for them. I would say that it is unique. It is special. There are a few other towns. I think there's also the fact that we're a college town, so we have probably on average, I would assume like a slightly more educated base, right?
Yeah.
But you see that also like in Comedy Club on State, which is in Madison, Wisconsin. It's the same thing. And so you not only do you have a large university presence there, it's also the state capital. So you have a lot of people that are out of college, young professionals. So they also have some sort of level of education and everything. And so you can talk about bigger ideas than just farts. You know?
You can take it to a different place.
Which is not true in all the places in the country.
Yeah.
And again, a big part of that is because those clubs have trained their audiences to think that stand-up comedy is a guy with a racist puppet or a guy talking about farts for 20 minutes. And so they actually are sort of confused when you do something different.
Wow. So, I just assume a comedy, like the Comedy Attic is how most places are because the 3 or 4 that I've ever been to are all in that some similar vein.
Yeah. And there's a handful of them. And in bigger cities, obviously it's different too. But as far as across the country and when people talk about doing the road, I talked about being in that club in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I love that club. But there's definitely some people that come out to that club that are expecting you to call all women bitches in your act and talk about whatever dumb, like again, I hate to keep coming back to fart as the example, but like whatever lowbrow dumb joke, that they want. And, it's just, and that's not to say everybody too.
Right. So but the club sets up the culture.
The club, there's a certain element of like the types of performers that they book most of the time are doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So last question before we kind of close it down and go to the after show. For someone who's just starting comedy, who's would love to take it, to the level that you're at right now, what are a couple of pieces of advice you have for them?
Well, first of all, I don't know if there's any advice that I can give because I'm extremely lucky. Most of the people that I know do comedy do not get paid for comedy.
Yeah.
To be able to do it as a job is definitely a very rare thing. I think that you have to just love it to almost to a level of a sickness because it is particularly when you start off doing stand-up comedy, it is very, very hard.
Yeah.
It is very tough. I did not start until I was 35 years old. And there were 2 times in the first 6 months of me open micing where I bombed so bad, so badly. 2 different times I did this. I just went home, took off my shoes, got into bed fully dressed, and cried myself to sleep. And I'm a 35-year-old man covered in tattoos, 220,
Yeah, like I'm just like hurts your soul.
It hurts your soul, yeah. Because, and someone has put it really well with this, like, when you're a musician and people don't like your song, they don't like your song. But when you're a comedian and they don't like your act, they don't like you.
Yeah. Wow, right. Because it's so personal.
Right.
It's personal for you. It's personal with the audience.
Yeah.
It's that connection. The relationship to the audience for a comedian is just so different than anything. It's
very
right?
unique, yeah. And so it is very brutal. I mean, it's hard when you start off, and no matter how thick you think your skin is, you'll find out real quick it's not that thick when you start open mic in comedy. But despite that, I was still obsessed. I still, after both of those times, I quit.
Yeah.
But then like 3 weeks later, I was back because I just couldn't let it go. I had some new idea that I needed to talk about. And so it is sort of addictive in that way too. If you're going to start off comedy, I would put it this way. Instead of like, how do you get to the level that I'm at, which is like, I'm an unfamous, like, working class comedian that barely pays his bills doing comedy, and I still have side hustle. Like if I don't have any shows for a week, I drive for Uber and Lyft to make money, because in comedy, there are some residual things like streaming and SiriusXM, but for the most part, you're not making any real money unless you're doing shows.
Yeah.
And so, I still have side hustle too. But I would say, rather than how do you get to where I'm at, I would say if you're never done comedy and you want to do comedy, instead go into it with the mindset of like, I've always wanted to do this thing, have fun, realize that it's not brain surgery. If you don't do well up on stage, that's not that big of a deal. It's just your ego. That's the only thing that gets killed is your ego.
Yeah. And
I would say have fun and just approach it with joy. Don't approach it thinking, oh, I can be a comedian, Had I not gotten fired / quit, I quit right before I got fired. I could tell it was coming from my day job that I had. Like my wife then was like, well, you seem pretty serious about this comedy thing. Why don't you go for it?
Yeah.
Like had that not happened, like, I don't know if I would be doing it full time.
Yeah.
Because making that leap from the security of a regular paycheck to nothingness for a long time is pretty tough.
Huh. So you go into it because you love it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a lot of creative endeavors that aren't appreciated like they should be by the financial side of our life. Does that make
or
sense?
society.
Society.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that sounds good. So we're going to go to the after show, and I'm actually going to ask you if you're cool with it to dig into the music world. So pick a song, pick one song, and we'll just kind of dig into it. You can maybe tell a story of why you picked it and why you love it, and maybe even like explode it a little bit. I don't know, maybe it's like the bass line that you just are so into, and we'll just spend 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it takes, talking about the song. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, it's cool.
How can folks find you if they want to see your shows, if they want to check you out? How can they find you?
Oh, well, you can find me. It's probably the easiest thing to do is just Google me. My name is Matt Alano Martin. There's one T in my first name, M-A-T, and then my last name is spelled A-L-A-N-O-Martin. I'm the only one in existence with that combination of names. If you Google me, that's the easiest way. If you really want a challenge, you can try to type in my website. It is mattalanomartincomedy.com. Every one of those words has a hyphen in between it, except for comedy and com, which has a dot. So it's MAT-ALANO-MARTIN-comedy.com. I really thought the hyphen movement was going to take off. I really was getting me in that. But yeah, they'll have my tour dates and a couple of clips of me doing stand-up and all that kind of good stuff.
Cool. And the link is in the show notes as well if you want to just go check it out there. So good. Well, Matt, thank you so much for just sharing a little bit of your time and talking about your shows and your comedy experience.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to finish this episode, but the conversation isn't over. We're headed to the after show over on Patreon. You can find it at patreon.com/scratchentrepreneur. Matt and I debrief the conversation, and he breaks down his favorite song right now. It's by an artist that I'd never heard of, and I simply haven't stopped listening since our conversation. I think you'll enjoy not only the artist, but the way Matt breaks down why he loves this artist's work. So check that out at patreon.com/scratchentrepreneur. Special thanks to Matt Alano Martin for taking the time to share his story with us. Contributors to this episode include the host, myself, Jeremy Goodrich. Music is by my high school buddy, Mark Vinton. Editing is by superhero Christopher Lang. If you enjoyed this podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. Please subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, please rate and review the show. It really does help us in the ranking and letting other folks hear our podcast. You can also check us out at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Scratch Entrepreneur. There's a conversation going on there. All the after shows are there, and additional resources for business owners are there as well. It's all together at patreon.com/Scratch Entrepreneur. Until the next time, have a wonderful day.